The courtroom cameras captured a moment so terrifying, so completely unbelievable, that viewers across America would replay it millions of times trying to understand how one man destroyed his entire life in less than 30 seconds. What started as a routine sentencing hearing inside a crowded courtroom suddenly transformed into pure chaos when a furious defendant reached into his jacket, pulled out a loaded handgun, and pointed it directly at the judge. But what happened next shocked everyone, because this wasn't just another angry criminal losing control. This was a perfectly timed collapse. The man thought the weapon would give him power. He thought fear would force everyone in that courtroom to obey him. He believed he had cornered the system. Instead, 30 seconds later, he was face down on the courtroom floor in handcuffs, while the entire nation watched his meltdown become one of the most humiliating courtroom disasters ever captured on camera. And trust me, the final 10 seconds changed everything. Before we get into this unbelievable courtroom takedown, I want you to comment where you're watching from right now. And if you enjoy stories about criminals getting exposed and justice being served in real time, hit that subscribe button, because the case you're about to witness proves one important thing. Some people walk into court thinking they can intimidate the justice system, but the justice system has seen people like them before. 32-year-old Marcus Reed entered the county courthouse already furious before the hearing even began. Security footage from earlier that morning showed him pacing outside the building, yelling into his phone, punching the hood of his truck, and repeatedly screaming that the court system had ruined his life. Marcus wasn't in court for a minor offense. He was facing sentencing after being convicted of armed robbery, aggravated assault, and illegal firearm possession after a violent convenience store robbery 6 months earlier. During the robbery, Marcus had threatened a cashier with a handgun and struck another employee hard enough to leave permanent nerve damage. The prosecution was seeking 18 years in prison, and Marcus knew it. According to court officers, his behavior had been escalating for weeks. He interrupted hearings, screamed at attorneys, threatened witnesses, and repeatedly accused the judge of targeting him personally. But nobody expected what he had secretly planned for sentencing day. Judge Harold Bennett had spent nearly 27 years inside criminal courtrooms. He had sentenced gang members, cartel traffickers, violent repeat offenders, and career criminals who treated the courtroom like a battlefield. Very little rattled him anymore. But Judge Bennett immediately sensed something different about Marcus Reed. There was a strange intensity in his behavior that morning. Not nervousness, not fear, something colder. The judge noticed Marcus constantly touching the front of his jacket, like he was checking something hidden underneath the fabric. He noticed the defendant repeatedly scanning the exits, the bailiffs, and the security cameras mounted on the courtroom walls. It was the behavior of someone preparing for something. The courtroom itself was packed. Several robbery victims sat behind the prosecution table waiting for the sentencing. Members of Marcus's family filled the back rows, many visibly emotional. Court staff moved carefully around stacks of paperwork while deputies stood near the exits monitoring the room. Nobody realized they were less than 5 minutes away from complete panic. Marcus sat beside his attorney, pretending to listen as prosecutors reviewed the violent details of the robbery. But his jaw kept tightening, his breathing grew heavier, and every time the prosecutor mentioned prison time, Marcus's eyes became darker. The tension inside the courtroom was becoming impossible to ignore. Then the prosecutor said the sentence recommendation that finally pushed Marcus over the edge. Based on the violent nature of the crimes and the defendant's repeated threats throughout these proceedings, the state recommends a sentence of 18 years without parole eligibility. Marcus snapped. He slammed both hands onto the defense table so violently that several people in the gallery screamed. "You're trying to bury me," Marcus shouted. His attorney immediately grabbed his arm and told him to calm down. That only made things worse. Marcus jerked away from his lawyer and began screaming directly at Judge Bennett. "This whole court is corrupt. You already decided my life before this trial even started." Judge Bennett remained perfectly calm. "Mr. Reed, sit down immediately," the judge ordered firmly, but Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His rage had completely taken over. "You think you can destroy me?" Marcus yelled. "You think you people control everything?" The courtroom deputies began moving closer. Audience members shifted nervously in their seats. Marcus's own family looked terrified, and then everything changed. Marcus reached inside his jacket. At first, many people thought he was pulling out paperwork, then they saw the handgun. The moment the black pistol appeared, the entire courtroom exploded into panic. People screamed, several spectators dropped to the floor, one woman near the back began crying hysterically. Marcus raised the gun with shaking hands and pointed it directly at Judge Bennett. For one horrifying second, nobody moved. Even the courtroom deputies appeared stunned that a loaded weapon had somehow made it inside the courtroom. The cameras captured Marcus standing in the center of the room, breathing heavily while aiming the gun straight toward the bench. "You ruined my life," he shouted. The courtroom froze, and what Judge Bennett did next stunned everyone. Because instead of panicking, instead of ducking for cover, the judge looked directly at Marcus and spoke with terrifying calmness. "Mr. Reed," Judge Bennett had said slowly, "if you pull that trigger, this ends one way for you." The silence inside the courtroom became unbearable. Marcus's hand trembled, the gun shook slightly, and for the first time since the outburst started, fear appeared in his eyes. But the truly unbelievable part, Judge Bennett wasn't stalling. He was buying time. Because, hidden behind the courtroom wall, 2 armed deputies had already begun moving into position. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the trap was already closing around him. The defendant continued yelling while waving the weapon around the courtroom. "You all think I'm some monster," he screamed. A deputy near the side entrance carefully stepped closer. Another moved behind the jury box. Neither officer took their eyes off the gun. Judge Bennett kept talking in the same calm tone. "Marcus," the judge said, "you still have a choice right now." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly because the judge stopped speaking to Marcus like a criminal. He spoke to him like a desperate human being moments away from making the worst decision imaginable. For a brief second, Marcus hesitated, the gun lowered slightly, and then someone in the gallery screamed. Marcus spun toward the noise. That movement gave deputies exactly the opening they needed. "Now," one officer shouted. What happened over the next few seconds looked like something from an action movie. 2 deputies rushed Marcus from opposite directions, while a third officer grabbed the defendant's gun arm before he could react. The weapon discharged once. The deafening gunshot echoed through the courtroom. People dove beneath benches. Papers flew through the air. Marcus tried to pull away, but the deputies slammed him violently onto the courtroom floor. The handgun skidded across the tiles. One deputy pinned Marcus's shoulder while another forced his arms behind his back. Marcus screamed uncontrollably as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. And just like that, it was over. 30 seconds earlier, Marcus thought he controlled the courtroom. Now he was lying face down in handcuffs while armed deputies surrounded him. The entire courtroom remained in shock. Several people were crying. One victim's family member collapsed into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. Court officers quickly evacuated the gallery while deputies secured the weapon. But the most unbelievable part came next. Judge Bennett never left the bench, even after a loaded gun had been pointed directly at him. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at Marcus being restrained on the floor, and delivered a statement that instantly went viral online. "You just turned an 18-year sentence into the rest of your life." The courtroom became completely silent. Marcus stopped struggling. Because deep down, he realized the judge was right. Everything had changed. Investigators later discovered Marcus had smuggled the handgun into the courthouse using a maintenance entrance currently under renovation. According to security reports, he had hidden the weapon inside a tool bag earlier that morning before retrieving it moments before sentencing. The incident triggered a massive courthouse security investigation. But online, the footage exploded. Within hours, clips from the courtroom spread across every social media platform. Millions of viewers watched the moment Marcus pulled the gun. Millions more replayed the exact second deputies tackled him to the floor. And one detail kept appearing in comment sections everywhere. Judge Bennett never panicked. People couldn't believe how calm the judge remained while staring directly at an armed defendant. Former law enforcement officers later explained that the judge's calm response may have prevented Marcus from firing intentionally. By refusing to escalate the panic, Judge Bennett created enough hesitation for deputies to move into position. But Marcus Reed's nightmare was only beginning, because pulling a firearm inside a courtroom triggered a completely different level of criminal consequences. Federal prosecutors became involved within 48 hours. Marcus was now facing attempted murder charges, terroristic threats, weapons violations, assault on court officers, and multiple federal firearm offenses. The possible sentence, life in prison. His original robbery case suddenly became the smallest of his problems. Even worse for Marcus, courtroom footage completely destroyed any possible defense. The surveillance cameras captured everything, the moment he reached into his jacket. The second he pointed the gun, the exact instant the deputies rushed him, and perhaps most devastating of all, the footage captured the fear on Marcus's own face after he realized he had completely destroyed his future. Former classmates, co-workers, and even distant relatives began recognizing him online. The viral footage spread so rapidly that major news networks picked up the story within hours. Headlines described it as one of the most shocking courtroom security incidents in years. Meanwhile, Judge Bennett returned to court the very next morning. That decision stunned the public almost as much as the incident itself. Reporters asked the judge why he returned so quickly after having a gun point directly at him. His answer became legendary. "If judges start running from intimidation," he said, "the justice system stops working." That quote spread everywhere. Millions praised the judge's composure. Courtroom deputies involved in the takedowns received commendations for preventing a potential tragedy. Security experts later analyzed the footage frame by frame, and one chilling discovery changed the entire narrative. Marcus's finger had briefly tightened on the trigger before deputies reached him. Investigators believe he was less than a second away from firing intentionally. That revelation horrified the nation because people suddenly realized how close the courtroom came to disaster. The victims from the original robbery later spoke publicly about the incident. One employee admitted she still had nightmares after seeing Marcus point the weapon. Another said the courtroom moment proved Marcus had always been dangerously unstable. Even Marcus's own attorney later admitted he feared someone was going to die. But perhaps the most brutal consequence for Marcus Reed wasn't the prison sentence, it was the humiliation, because every second of his meltdown lived forever online. The footage became symbolic of something much bigger, a man so consumed by rage and entitlement that he believed violence could overpower accountability, but instead of escaping consequences, he guaranteed consequences far worse than anything he originally faced. At his final sentencing hearing nearly a year later, Marcus looked completely different. Gone was the screaming arrogance, gone was the aggressive posturing, gone was the rage. The man who once pointed a gun at a judge now sat quietly in chains, staring at the floor while prosecutors described how close the courthouse came to tragedy. This time, Marcus barely spoke, and when the final sentence was announced, several people in the courtroom nodded silently. Life without parole eligibility. The courtroom remained silent as deputies escorted Marcus away. No screaming, no threats, no outburst. Just silence, because the reality had finally sunk in. One decision, 30 seconds. And his entire life was over. The viral footage continues circulating online to this day, not because people enjoy watching violence, but because the video reminds people of something deeply important: acts have consequences. And sometimes those consequences arrive faster than anyone expects. Marcus Reed believed fear would give him power. Instead, fear destroyed him. He walked into court angry about an 18-year sentence. He walked out facing life in prison. And all because he made one catastrophic choice in front of cameras that never stopped recording. If this story shocked you, comment "Justice Served" below. And tell me honestly, what should happen to people who bring weapons into courtrooms? Do you think the deputies handled the situation correctly? Would you have stayed calm like Judge Bennett? I want to hear your thoughts. And make sure you subscribe, because next time we're covering the unbelievable case of a defendant who tried to escape court through the ceiling, only to crash directly into the courtroom next door while cameras were rolling. Trust me, you do not want to miss that one. Because when criminals panic under pressure, the results are sometimes more unbelievable than fiction. This case proved one final thing: respect for the justice system is not optional. The moment someone chooses violence inside a courtroom, they're no longer fighting for freedom. They're destroying whatever freedom they had left. And Marcus Reed learned that lesson in the most public, humiliating, and irreversible way imaginable.